Good afternoon, Jessica. Thank you for taking the time to come on and chat with me. I am so excited to have you on and to talk about a topic that a lot of us myofunctional therapists have patients that ask a lot of questions about voice and phonation and all of this. So welcome, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be back in the normal medical world. So that's exciting.
So share a little bit about your myo journey. Like how did you even start to learn about any of this?
Yeah, so I came into the myo world on a total fluke and as being the patient. So I got invited to do or to attend a small lecture about what myofunctional therapy is. It was catered towards dentists, and that's not me, but I just showed up. And basically, I knew, oh, it's something with face muscles, and that was about it. And at this point in my life, I was just starting my early professional career as a singer. And I was frustrated because the vocal pedagogy world in singing, in voice, didn't really talk about the tongue, certainly didn't talk about the face muscles. And we just banged on about the larynx. And I wanted to know more because tongue tension is so pervasive in the singing world. So I went to this lecture and it just blew my whole mind. And I became instantly obsessed. And I started, I was like, well, I need to learn how to do this. I need to bring it into the singing world. Why aren't more people talking about it? And so that started that whole trajectory. So I like to say that I have two equal obsessions because I still keep my professional singing career, but I definitely do not think myo is like a day job. It's definitely another soul mission for me.
I love that. And so tell me, because so when we talk about networking, like when I teach my students, I never think to say network with voice coaches, but we should be, right? So tell me a little bit about how myofunctional therapists can collaborate with voice coaches.
Sure. So just like the myo world, the voice world has a lot of vocal pedagogy, like lectures and groups, their own podcasts that I've been on. So just honestly, they love to learn too. So just something as simple as an email, hello, this is what I do. I think I might be able to help your students with tongue tension. That's instantly going to grab people's attention. And it's certainly something that the music world should be more familiar with and isn't. So yes, please spread the word by just saying hi.
So talk a little bit about how correct tongue posture plays a role and how it influences phonation.
Sure. Um, Even singers who have a lot of tongue control and training can still suffer with tongue tie and with just poor oral posture in general. Um, in the traditional, as in classical music world, we spend a lot of time talking about keeping the tongue relaxed and lifted and high, which it's more inclined to do if it's already resting gently on the roof of the mouth. So that's like a very easy crossover there. We also talk a lot about engaging the soft palate, lifting it, which, as we all know, it's more inclined to do if the tongue is also in an upwards resting posture, and certainly if it's free from tongue restrictions and ties.
So how can you explain to a client how their tongue tie, is impacting? And we talked a little bit, prior to us starting to record, but I get asked a lot by musicians, is this going to help me? Is this going to make things worse? Am I going to have to work harder at my voice? How does tongue tie influence I mean, I don't even know the proper terminology when it comes to music and voice. You don't want to hear me sing, but I think you know the question that I'm asking.
Yeah, no, you do it. You do great. And you know what? They asked me this too. So, the first thing I would say is, it's just like all sports. Singing is a sport. You
Mhm.
have to be able to move your body in very specific ways that it doesn't move as a normal human. And obviously, one of those takes a lot of tongue control. So in this case of tongue ties, if you're restricted in your mobility, that means you're not able to isolate. And we know that isolating is incredibly important in sports, right? Let's say you had a tennis player whose shoulder was tied to his hip. Do you think his overhand would have a nice swing? Of course not, right? So a very easy opener would say, making you into the best version of yourself as a human is only going to help you become the best version of yourself as a singer, because we're making your whole body better. The other thing that we're doing is we're giving you more freedom, not just literally in releasing your restriction, but also ease, because that's also what comes by creating isolation, is you have more ease, more control, more choice. So all of these things directly affect vocal technique, because that's, to me, what vocal technique is. It's a skill. It allows you to make the choice that you want in any given moment to produce the result you want. And if we're tongue-tied, we don't have those choices, right? If the tongue goes up, the larynx has to go up. If the soft palate goes up, the larynx has to go up. And so people aren't able to keep all of the systems in the right places because they have to juggle against each other.
And I would imagine too, just the impacts that, whether it's, correcting a tongue tie or just overall improving oral facial muscle function, the impact it has on breathing mechanics and overall like respiratory function, I would assume only makes you a better singer.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And there's a lot of things that go into singing that are not the tongue. The way that, especially in the English language, the way that we create a lot of our consonants is with specific muscles. Like, for example, the rosaurus. We use the rosaurus a lot when we're doing M's, a nice sideways horizontal shape. That's not really conducive to singing. So by training all of the different muscles of the face, then we can encourage people, oh, you know what? There's actually a couple different ways that you can make an M sound while you're singing. And maybe, option 2 or 3 is a little bit better in this specific moment. So again, just giving people more choices, more chances at isolation, more chances at ease. Yeah, all very important.
Now, are you intertwining, like, I guess I'm trying to get it, like when you're working with a patient, are you intertwining the two into a session? So like, do you, whatever, teach them an exercise, talk about tongue posture, or you've gotten to the point where you've worked on, better posterior function of the tongue or something, and then now you're having them hit a certain note or something, like to test it. Do you mean?
Yeah. So just like all sports, before you start integrating things like specifically into the training, you do have to do like some muscular training, like just lifting the bicep in the gym, right? Just lifting the posterior tongue, because even though they may use it all day long, they're also pressing the tongue out, or they're opening the jaw too much, or whatever it is. So yeah, there's definitely a combination of all things going on, strength training, but also like specific to singing vocalises, I guess you would say.
And how would tongue restriction, or again, poor tongue function, impact like vocal, like agility?
Yeah, so that genioglossus, as you may know, connects to the larynx. And that can be a really frustrating aspect for a lot of singers. When singers talk about having pain or tongue tension, that's like one of the biggest frustrations that singers have in their technique is tongue tension. And what I find fascinating is when they talk about it, they don't open their mouth and stick out their tongue and point at it and say, I have tongue tension. What they do is they lift their chin up and they point to the diaphragm of the mouth, or that under area, and they say, I have tongue tension, I have pain, and they point right to that area. And I don't think it's any coincidence that that's the area they choose. And this can even show up sometimes in people's speaking voice. For example, I worked with a bass baritone, so he had a very naturally lowest voice. But when he spoke, he sounded much higher. because that tie was very gently like keeping his larynx in a constantly elevated position. He was fortunate enough that it didn't impact his singing directly, but it did cause him like a lot of endurance issues. He would start off pretty good, and then after a couple hours, he'd be extremely tired singing. And what's interesting is after he got his tongue tie release done with Zaghi, his speaking voice immediately changed. And he sounded like a bass baritone when he talked. It was fascinating, fascinating.
Oh. Oh. Now, like, what if and I don't know that I don't know how I want to word this question. Because of course we don't want to compensate, we don't want to, make different adaptations so that we compensate even further. But like some patients, clients don't want to get a tongue tie release. So like I guess what I'm trying to say, like, is there any technique or I guess adaptation a singer can make if they realize they have lack of mobility in their tongue, but maybe aren't at the current moment wanting to go and get it released?
Yeah, definitely. Myo can definitely improve singing technique in all singers, regardless of their age, their education, and whether they're tied or not. And if it's a grade 1 or 4, yes, it can absolutely be beneficial. Um, the singing world still focuses a lot on sound, right? And so they approach everything by sound. And what we've all learned as myos is that watching people is incredibly important. And I like to joke that if you put a singer on mute, you can see a lot of compensations happening, and you can even start to guess what it would sound like with those compensations. So yes, it can still be extremely beneficial for people. Again, just sort of, I like to talk about singing on interest versus singing on principle. People will manhandle a lot, use a lot of muscle that they don't necessarily need. And myo can be a really great way to help them do the exact same thing in a more ergonomic way.
That totally makes sense. What about, is there, I like, as you're talking, like more and more questions, I'm just like, so,
Yeah.
that's so, like, cool. Is there like a common area of, I don't know, again, I don't know any technical music terms, but something that patients that have restricted mobility tend to struggle the most with when it comes to singing if they're tongue tied? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yes. Um, this is where it gets a little tricky because in my mind, we grade people 1 through 4, but where the tongue tie affects them the most is actually a little bit more important to me than the grade. For
Mhm.
example, you can have a grade 4 that is pretty tight in the middle of the tongue and about the same in the back of the tongue. Or you can have a grade 4 that's very tight in the back, but the middle and the tip are pretty much fine,
Mhm.
right? But those two people will have very different, as I like to say, singing symptoms.
Mhm.
So I think the biggest thing, like for all ties in the whole world, people struggle with pure, clean E vowels, especially as pitch ascends. Because as you know, if we need the back of the tongue to be the highest it possibly can in that vowel, and then as pitch ascends, we also need the larynx to very gently descend. And moving in that contrary motion is impossible. And that's when they really start to feel tension and maybe even pain. Sometimes in people who have a lot of restriction, they'll actually like yodel, or they'll stop phonation, because if the body has the choice between tongue up or larynx down, it's always going to choose larynx down because you're going to choke and die. And so it
Do you see a lot of clients of yours also struggling with TMD?
yeah, yes. That also could be, unfortunately, something that happens, especially in the classical music world, is voice teachers are sometimes very afraid of sending people for ortho or moving their teeth. So that's another like big ask that I would have for the whole community is don't be afraid to talk to people about ortho and about airway health because they're all about pharyngeal space. So if you can say, if you can say, hey, did you know that certain kinds of expansion can improve pharyngeal space and nasal cavity resonance? Now you have their attention. They will listen to that.
Right. Oh my gosh, so cool. Is there like a specific, I mean, I know you already shared the example with us, the case story of the gentleman whose speech voice changed after the tongue tie. Is there another I guess like what's your coolest success story that you've had if you can think of, you know,
Oh gosh.
I'm sure there's many, but like if
Yeah.
there's one where like it automatically comes to your mind.
Well, okay. I was actually just editing this video yesterday. So if you, yeah, so like you can go find this on my YouTube if you want. But I had a client who had chronic vocal hemorrhaging. And at the time when he came to me, he also had a polyp, but he didn't know. He just assumed that all of his symptoms were results of his tongue tie. So after he got his tongue tie released, lots of things got better, but he still didn't feel vocally well. And so I was like, hey, go get scoped. It's not going to hurt you, go get scoped. He found out he had a polyp. So he got his tongue tie released. 3 weeks later, he got his tongue tie released. 5 days after that, he got scoped and found out he had a polyp. He went to see a surgeon the next day who specialized in singers. And she said, oh yeah, you need surgery. You'll be fine, but you need surgery. It won't go away on its own. Being silent doesn't help, blah, blah, blah. And he said, all right, well, if she says I need surgery, great, I'm going to go get surgery. And he said, everything that he found online confirmed that. So he said, well, if I'm getting surgery anyway, I'm not going to be silent. I'm going to keep singing. He was in college at the time, so for music. So he was working a lot, dancing a lot. So he just lived his full out normal life. And 2.5 weeks later, so 3 weeks exactly from when he got his tongue tie release done, he was getting his pre-surgery op. They scoped him again and it was gone.
Oh my God, that's
Gone.
crazy.
Yeah, wild. So we can't say for sure that it was the tongue tie release. However, it was the only variable that changed because
What did the doctor say?
and that's what was so frustrating is the doctor was kind of like, oh, okay, cool.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's so frustrating. Yeah, so frustrating. But yeah, just amazing. And what we were talking about, he and I afterwards is, let's imagine you didn't get your tongue tie release, right? And you did go to have surgery on the polyp, right? So you would have healed, you would have gotten better, but would have happened again? Would you have vocal hemorrhaged again, right?
Right.
But not only did you get this amazing result of the polyp and the hemorrhage disappearing naturally while not being silent in 3 weeks, which is insane, but also I had another meeting with him yesterday, which was the video I was opening. So this was about a year ago now, and he hasn't had a single vocal issue since.
Wow. That's insane. That is like so cool. He should go on your page and like talk about his journey or something.
Yeah, that's what. So yeah, so he was like giving his whole story. So that's
Oh,
yeah.
cool. Oh, awesome. All right. Well, everybody, that will definitely probably be on your page by the time this episode gets out. So everybody needs to go check it out.
Yeah.
What about, has there ever been a time where maybe not that getting their tongue tie released like made anything worse? Cause I don't really think that ever really happens unless like, obviously it wasn't a complete release or, post-op wasn't done correctly. But I guess was there ever any a time where it didn't yield like the results that you were anticipating or the client was anticipating? And if so, was there a particular reason why?
Honestly, no. I continue to be floored at the amount of results that people get in their singing. I mean, I've been doing this almost 10 years and it still feels like witchcraft sometimes. It's insane. People struggle with their breath support, pelvic floor mobility, and not everything resolves itself in the chair, but a lot of it does.
Right.
And the biggest thing that people say is, I can finally do what I understood for so long, right? The whole like knowledge versus application. I knew breath support should be like this. I knew my high note should feel or sound XYZ. And after the release, I went into the practice room and I did it. Whereas before, it was years and years of lessons, me trying and failing, practicing, practicing, practicing. Nothing got better, or it did one time, but not the next 5 times. And they're
Mhm.
like, yeah, I just go in and I do it. It's incredible. And then they talk about how that in turn has affected things, even like their stage confidence.
I'm
Because,
sure. I'm
right,
sure.
I mean, if you imagine, with the tongue tie, if you never know what's going to come out of your mouth on certain skills, you're just showing up on stage and rolling the dice. It is extremely stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if
Is
it
there,
goes poorly, what happens? But we start to like turn that inwards. I'm dumb. I can't do it. I'm not a good enough singer. I'm not naturally talented, you know? And
right?
so they get their release and they have um, this sense of control and peace and trust and knowing that what they want is going to show up every time. I mean, they just radically change even
Oh
as
my God.
it's
Oh
amazing.
yeah, it's been extremely transformative for sure on so many levels. Do you
Yeah.
get like, I'm just thinking, like sometimes we get pushback from the ortho community or the ENTs. Like, do you get pushback from the music community on like, because obviously it's not, um, I'm sure you're one of the very few, or maybe even the only, vocal teacher or whatever, the technical term for that is that understands all of this myo stuff or even knows to talk about it or knows it exists. So do people look at you sometimes like you're like a Looney Tune?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, I have the world's tallest hat that says crazy on it for sure. um, yeah, and I think what frustrates me is not necessarily that people don't know, although we need to keep working on that. But what frustrates me the most is this sort of like intense, automatic, like pushback that people have. They're like,
Mhm.
you're doing what? Oh, that's horrible. No, don't ever do it. And I just think to myself, do you know anything about tongue ties? Because you just told your student no, but like you don't really know anything about it, first of all. But also it can be very harsh to me. Some of the singers that I see are in physical pain every day when they're singing, when they're practicing. And as people can imagine, an artist's life is a vocation. You see that as your identity. And so people, if they feel like they have to choose between keeping their singer identity with pain
Mhm.
or losing pain, but losing their singer, they choose pain. They will live in pain because it's so important to them. And what I hope to teach people is you don't have to live like that. You don't have to live like that. And you certainly don't have to listen to someone else telling you that that's the way it has to be. That is BS.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's got to be so, just frustrating. And, uh, I'm sure too, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it works, but I assume like a lot of people spend a lot of time or are seeing the same coach for many, many, many years and probably, of course, build trust and confidence in this provider. And then when they go and present this information to kind of be, like you said, they're not even open to it. They're like almost made to feel like they're dumb for exploring this different avenue. It's got to be just so disheartening, And I mean, that's with anything, right? Especially in the medical community, too. So many people get like made to feel like they're crazy
Yeah.
when there is a reason why they're presenting with X, Y, and Z. So how, like, what are you doing? How are you getting this more out to your community?
Yeah, honestly, just the more you can be very like clean and scientific in your approach, like how we talked about making you a better human is going to make you a better singer, right? If you have, I just love sports analogies, but like, let's pretend you're Usain Bolt, you're the world's best runner, but you have webbed toes.
Mhm.
some some people may not know because you got your shoes on and they never look. They never open your mouth and look.
Mhm, mhm.
But it's going to affect how your foot moves, and he can certainly feel it, even if nobody can see it. And yeah, will it stop his career? No, maybe not. He'll still be incredibly talented and disciplined, but how much better would he be without it? You know,
Right.
you're raising his level also. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah.
How long do you typically work with clients? I mean, I'm sure it varies, but
Um, yeah, I think, yeah, it just depends. Sometimes not necessarily on like the education level of the singer, or professional or not. Some people are just more kinesthetic and in tune with their bodies than others. Some people, like if they had a really bad grade 4 tongue tie, they'll need more vocal work than someone who is maybe a grade 1 usually. So it just depends. But I don't know if I'm gonna ballpark it, maybe like anywhere, a short one I would say would be 5 sessions, a long one maybe like 25.
okay, okay, cool. And what about like age range? Do you work with everybody?
Um, there's not a lot of kid singers that I see. Um, they're usually already in college when they're working on things like this. Like they've already decided that they are in the professional lane.
Mhm.
So 20 to 45. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm sure too, like, I don't know if do you ever get like then like family members of those clients that are like, do I have a tongue tie? Like, can you assess me? Maybe they're not
Um,
professional singers, but
yeah, that definitely happens. And also what happens is like people would be like, oh my gosh, well, I have my dad's tongue and I'm sending him to you, you know?
that's fantastic. Are there any like I know you've done other podcasts and events like this before. Are there like any questions or any topics we didn't cover that will be important for the listeners? Like, like I don't know, what's your favorite question that you get asked typically on a podcast?
Yeah, when in regards to singers, I think one of the most important questions is people are always worried that it's going to change their voice. It's going to change their color. It's going to change how they sound. And in my 10 years of experience, that's never happened. It's basically just like making you even better. You still sound and look like you. And I'm sure some people like I'm sure you've had patients who like maybe didn't want to do face exercises because they like don't want their cheekbones to look like XYZ, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. It's like, no, we're not changing you. We're not changing you from brunette to blonde or whatever. We're just making you like an even better version of yourself.
Yep, like a 2.0 version.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Now where can people find you? Social media, website, if you have
Yeah. So I do have an Instagram, but it's mostly all just singing stuff. Most all of my stuff, singing stuff. I have a YouTube channel, so if people are more interested in like we touched briefly, but like how different parts of the tongue can affect different quote unquote singing symptoms. I have a couple lectures about that if people are interested. Um, Opus Myo is both my Instagram and my YouTube. So you can find me there. And I also have a website called Myo for Singers. You can check that out as well. I have some PubMed articles that aren't directly about singers, but it talks about aspects that singers may find interesting. So you can hand those off to some of your patients if you would like. For example, one talks about like soft palate shape and lift and how tongue tie affects that. Things like that, they'll definitely find interesting, and it's good to give them some like hard science too, because they also like that.
And then my final question is, what did you notice in your voice change when you got into this world? And I assume did, obviously like myo on yourself. Did you have a tongue tie? Like, so
Yeah,
how did your voice change and grow?
yeah, I had a grade 3 modifying to a 2. It was more tight in the posterior than the middle. I just had a few middle symptoms, but not many. Um, I had a lot of trouble staying in tune in like the middle to upper part of my range, right where my voice shifts, or we call the passaggio. I could never stay in tune in that area, even though I could hear I was out of tune. So that was a big one. Um, I also had trouble with high notes. Um, my voice, I already like could sing lots of notes very quickly. That was something that was already kind of easy for me. But after the release, it became even faster. So that was a cool little bonus. And yeah, just like ease and spin in the sound, which I think is a very universal change that kind of happens to everybody. It doesn't sound so forced or held or like manufactured. It's a lot more like easy and free and sexy. That nice spin that we all admire in people who just make it look and sound so easy.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's so cool. All of this is so fascinating to me, especially that nasal polyp. That is just like wild to me. And I'm so mad that that doctor didn't have a better reaction.
Yeah, a little disappointing, but maybe we'll get the next one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Jessica, for taking the time and coming to chat with me. And everybody go follow Jessica on her Instagram page, her website. Definitely think about networking with, vocal coaches and those in the music community. It's so needed, right? So thank you for sharing your insights with us. And I want to hear your voice, so I'm gonna have to go check out. Do you sing on your pages?
Sometimes I'll do some vocalises and stuff. Yeah.
So cool. I like so wish I was musically inclined, and I am like the exact opposite. So I love, love, every time I hear somebody sing and sing really well, I just cry. I get so emotional. I don't know if
Oh,
it's because I can't.
that's so sweet. Oh,
But anyways, thank you again so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks.